Caesar sister, Caesar wife, please my mother drop your knife. It can result to a loss of a life. Do not violate the right. Oh, my daddy is a right. Do not force her to annihilate my way. Do not harm this character. I say no, 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 no.
Hello everyone. We're back here today to continue our conversations on Sgbv in collaboration with UN Transitional Justice Project Office, UN Peace Building Fund, OCHR, and funded by the Irish government. This project has been funded by the Irish government to help the transitional justice process in its work, in its fight in addressing Sgbv in the Gambia. I have with me today Modlamin Davis from He for She, Mr. Abdumane from the TRRC, and I have also Dr. Patrick Hideuko, who is a medical practitioner and has done a lot of work on Sgbv or has seen the effects of Sgbv in the Gambia. Today we want to talk about the role of men in battling, in addressing Sgbv. What can men do from the home right to the communities, right to the medical field, or in all spheres of life to help in the fight against Sgbv. So I will let Modlamin Davis and the rest introduce themselves, and then we can carry on with the conversations.
Thank you so much. Like you said, my name is Modlamin Davis, and I work with an organization called He for She Gambia. So He for She is a young men-led organization that is under the auspices of the Network Against Gender-Based Violence. We were founded in 2014. And our work revolves on issues around gender-based violence with focus on the role of young men and boys in ending GBV.
Thank you very much. My name is Abdou Mane. I am the Director for Research and Investigations at the TRRC. As per the TRRC Act in 2017, the TRRC is mandated to establish an impartial historical record of human rights violations committed from July 1994 to January 2017, and this is where the role of research and investigation is very paramount. So my work is to coordinate and provide strategic direction for researchers, investigators, and also statement takers, and also to be victim-centered in the way we treat victims and also how the work of the TRRC is done. So I think when we talk about victims here, the victims of Sgbv are very relevant because it's part of the specific human rights violations that the TRRC is looking into.
My name is Patrick Hideuko. I am a medical professional, precisely an obstetrician gynecologist, and my role is usually in the management of gender-based violence, especially physical violence as well as sexual violence. I have been involved in training health workers in the area of gender-based violence over the last 8 years or so in the Gambia. I've also been involved in developing the clinical guidelines used by the health workers in all the facilities for the management of gender-based violence. I also have some research interests in the area of gender-based violence, especially as it deals with the medical aspect.
So, I want to start with you again. We know men obviously have a huge role to play in addressing Sgbv. And also we have seen in the transitional justice process, Sgbv have got a huge part of their work. The TRRC have a mandate, in fact, on Sgbv, and Abdul will digress on that a little bit more. But coming from a civil society organization, what do you think in your work you can encourage men to do so that their roles can be enhanced in terms of fighting Sgbv?
First and foremost, and with your permission, of course, I'd want to dissect the different terms. I mean, that is what is gender and what is Sgbv. So when you talk about gender, you're talking about the socially ascribed roles given to people because of the fact that you're either a woman or a man. As a woman, this is what is expected of you at home, and as a man, excuse me, this is what is expected of you. So when you talk about GBV, this is the intentional use of power or position with the aim of inflicting pain on another person, let's say on the basis of his or her gender. For example, when you look at an issue of FGM, for instance, because I tell people all the time, when you talk about FGM and child marriage, men always take the center stage. Men try to propagate some of these things because of the fact that the other sex that is I mean, that suffers from it is our women. So I think it's important that, okay, men take the center stage in that. So at our own level, that is He4C, some of the things that we do is to ensure that we learn and teach other men the different effects of GBV. I don't think you can advocate against gender-based violence if you do not know what it really is about. Also, one of the things that we also do is to ensure that, I mean, some of the behaviors of men, we try to question them. So I think society has normalized some of these behaviors. And non-respecter of boundaries. You see, men before, when you look at all these different forms of gender-based violence, sexual violence is always at the top. Of course, Dr. Patrick would, agree with me. The network always has a register in a lot of hospitals. When you look at the different forms of gender-based violence, sexual violence is always up there. So one of the things that we think propagates this is because men start by making slight innuendos. They test waters. They do not jump into this with both feet. They make comments, like you're pausing, for instance, oh, look at this, look at that, your boobs and all whatnot, and then wait for your reaction. If you're passive about it, they continue. If you're assertive about it, then some of them would stop. So some of those behaviors that we normalize in our different households, in our different communities, we try to question some of these things. We try to also ensure that men understand that they have a very big bearing on the other sex. There are things that we do even at home, even for our parents. Of course, I'd want to digress a bit. Sometimes when a parent goes out to buy dolls, for instance, for the two children, for the girl, they would buy a female one, so you can plait the hair and everything. For the boy, you'd buy a gun. To tell the boy, you're supposed to be tough, you're supposed to use the gun, you're supposed to shoot, you understand. Some of these behaviors, some of these things that we do, we are actually encouraging or propagating GBV unknowingly. So at the level of the civil society organizations, He4C to be specific, we try to question some of these things. We try to ensure men understand that some of these things that we do, they have a very huge bearing on the other gender. Yes.
I understand your question, but when you question, do you go deeper or do you go beyond just questioning and ensure that these behavioral changes, these behaviors that you have mentioned, how do we make sure that they change? Because the men are the change agents. They are the ones who are at the privilege level. They have the privilege of being given top priority in society across all the wherever they're supposed to represent. But it's one thing when we decide that we are going to question what they do, but beyond questioning, what are some of the mechanisms or the strategies we can put in place at the level of the civil society organizations to work with communities so that men start seeing this from a different perspective, that it should be about inclusion and equality.
I agree. So at He4C, we are not a pressure group.
Okay.
We do advocacy. So we raise the awareness of the masses and men to be specific. So when we go to different communities, like I said, we try to mentor especially some of the young men in different communities. And we are of the conviction that, of course, it's important that we also target older men and women. But they've done their bit. Our parents have done their bit in subjecting their daughters to harmful traditional practices, like child marriage, like FGM, for instance. So that is why we focus on young people. Someone like myself who's not yet married, for instance, I'm going to get married, isn't it? And men are the decision makers in the different households and in different communities. So if men like myself, I'm someone as young as Abdul also could stand up to say, I wouldn't subject my daughter to this harmful traditional practice, I wouldn't lay my hand on my wife, I wouldn't do so and so and so, then we think in the nearby future, the issue of gender-based violence, we'd focus on, sexual violence. I think it would come to a stop.
Catching boys young, so they understand gender equality and also practice it, and also mentorship. Those are two key things. Thank you so much. Mr. Mane, you wear 3 caps, and you have seen in your work as a research director at the TRRC, you have seen how difficult it has been to make sure that you capture the degree of sexual-based SGBV in the Gambia, considering that we are looking into the past 20 or 22 years or more. What do you do? What do you think? How can men in the Gambia help you so that your work becomes easy? We understand that most of them are the perpetrators, but they also need to, how do you think they can help you realize, to help you make sure that victims are not blamed, victims are not stigmatized, and also victims are brave enough to come out? Because men, in as much as we talk about victims coming out, so how society views them, especially how men are treated and dealt with, will make the victims come out much easier and a bit more. You have seen a low victim participation in SGBV cases.
Thank you very much, Tuti. This discussion is legitimate. Number one, because if you look at most of the perpetrators of SGBV are men, and because of in most leadership position, the occupiers are men, and when it comes to power relationships, the powerful are usually men. So obviously, when we talk about SGBV in the context of our work, we have realized that in most cases where women are involved, are victims, is because they have competing interests, and usually because of their situation, they have to give in, in certain situations, because that is what the person in leadership position demands. And obviously, for men to play a role in combating or ensuring that we limit cases of SGBV, first I think men even need to understand what SGBV is, and not only to, even if they have victims of SGBV, they should not only see them as victims, but they should treat them as victims. Seeing somebody as a victim is you recognize, yes, is involved in an SGBV case, or somebody has actually violated her, but you don't treat the person as a victim. Anytime the person passes, or moves from one point to another, you try to cast aspersion on her attitude. You try to cast aspersion on the way the person dressed. So your question is, you question more or less on the why, which in SGBV cases, if you want to get the information, you should not focus on the why, but you should try to understand what happened. How did it happen? But even if you are asking how did it happen, you should not ask the question in such a way that it will re-traumatize the victim. So the Trial International has conducted a mapping, and it is the mapping report that we look at most of the time. And compared to the number of victims that came forward, you realize that there is still much that needs to be done, because most of the perpetrators are men. And you will understand that at the time some of these women are involved, because of our mindset, the way we constructed our mindset, either in the religious perspective or due to our societal biases, we tend to blame them. And we see them as opportunists instead of seeing them as victims, where men have a role or a responsibility to prevent or protect them. So if somebody has an opportunity to do something, he will obviously do it because there is that power relationship. So even some of the successful cases that personally myself and my team were able to look at, we have understood that their husbands were very supportive. They support them from the initial stage and understand that, yes, she is a victim. I need to support her. And I think this is what is expected of all well-meaning men, to not just cast aspersion. Maybe sometimes even there could be economic reasons. There could be so many factors, even in the household, warranting the woman to do what she did. So we must understand why they do it, but not try to re-traumatize them. If we understand how did this happen, we should not ask them why they do it, but we should, through our engagement with them, we will be able to know it over time. So that is very important. There is one instance I even had to commend the man and told him that, you are the kind of man that our society needs. You have to support your wife, because obviously she has the choice to actually decide whether to open up to you. But you must have created an enabling environment such that the woman has that confidence. And we had certain cases whereby women, they would tell you, no, I would have to tell my husband that I have a mission to attend to. They would not even take a step which will make the woman, the man understand that yes, the person is having an interaction with investigators, or because ultimately the family of the man himself, all will cast aspersion, will try to question why it's her fault. So I think first we must understand and treat victims as victims, and that requires us to show empathy, to support them, so that their self-esteem, is not affected. Because when their self-esteem is affected, it can have even standing impacts, not just on herself, but even on the relationship. So we should therefore be, supporters, as opposed to being re-traumatizing the victims.
Thank you so much. And that is why I think the Irish government have decided that they need to intensify the support to victims. Since the TRRC is a victim-centered, have taken a victim-centered approach, Sgbv is still a sensitive issue in the Gambia. The support has not been there for the longest time, but now that the Irish government, through United Nations Human Rights and also the UN Peace Building Fund, have decided to come up and see how they can intensify their support to victims, but more so to Sgbv victims, because they're blamed, they're stigmatized, and they, like you said, if men create the enabling environment for their women to be brave enough to come up and speak up, that could go a long way in making sure that they receive the justice that they're supposed to be receiving. So thank you so much. Dr. Patrick, I want to come to you, but as we were discussing, we have seen that the role of men in fighting Sgbv starts from somewhere, i.e. it starts from the home. Not only do we say that, okay, let's wait until she becomes a victim so that we can start being supportive, but in order to make sure that we break the cycle of violence, in order to make sure that we see a significant change in the narrative of Sgbv victims, it needs to start somewhere. And as you said the home. It should start from the home, how we nurture our boys and girls, how we make sure that they become responsible adults, how they educated, right up to in the event that they have been violated, then their support, like Abdul said, is where it's most needed too. So in your work, you have seen all kinds of victims of Sgbv. So what do you think men can do, coming from your field, to make sure that the fight is intensified?
I quite agree that the prevention of Sgbv and the fight against sexual and gender-based violence must start in the home. And it must start from childhood. Men who happen to be fathers need to create a certain environment for their daughters. Fathers need to develop a kind of bond or relationship with their daughters. I have seen situations where, I had this young lady who was married and who was being beaten by her husband while she was pregnant. And her parents are in this town, and she doesn't have the confidence to tell anybody. But she mentioned it to me in the course of my relating to her as a doctor. And I encouraged her to go home to her father. Since she can't tell anybody, she should go home and at least speak to her parents. They may even be able to solve this, because she did not want to make a case out of it. And she traveled home to where her parents are staying. And she was not able to tell her father that, look, this is what I'm going through in my marriage. And this kind of situation arises because when she was growing up as a child, she probably has not developed a close bond or relationship with her father. Men need to spend time with their daughters. They need to model what a good man is to their daughters, because you see, it's what most daughters look up to their fathers. Most daughters will end up marrying men that are like their fathers. So it's what she has seen, how she sees you treating her mother. She will accept that is how men behave. So if you're beating the mother, she will think it is normal for her husband to also beat her. But if she sees that you treat her mother with respect and you are always available in the home, you help around the home, that's what she will expect in a man. And any man who tries to beat her up, she's not going to accept that. So it needs to start from the home. Men need to model what it takes to be a real man to their sons as well, so that boys get to understand that a real man does not beat his wife or beat women. A real man does not forcefully have his way with a woman. So it has to start from the home. And like my colleagues have mentioned, it shows in the kind of gender stereotyping that we offer children. I mean, what's the point in buying a gun for a boy? How many parents don't see anything wrong with giving their sons guns? But if you say buy a gun for your daughter, they say no, we don't want to do that. So you're already putting something in their mind. And then we need to provide as parents equal opportunities for both our sons and our daughters. Sometimes in some families, the education of the boy is prioritized over that of the girl. And what ends up happening is that it means that these girls, because of the lack of education, they are now going to be economically disempowered, which is already a form of violence against them, and which is already setting them up for gender-based violence as they go on, because they will not be empowered to be able to face situations or look up to their rights when those kind of situations arise. So I believe that there is a strong role that the foundation has to play, and men play a strong role in this area. I think one of our colleagues also spoke about the fact that men need to encourage women who have experienced violence to come forward. A few years ago, I happened to attend to a young lady who was raped while she was on a journey in this country. And of course, immediately she got home, she told her husband. And the husband said, no, we should not talk about it, because he felt it would be an embarrassment and a shame to his own name. So they kept quiet about it until the lady began to develop some symptoms of a sexually transmitted infection. So when she came to consult me because of the STI she was having, and then told me the background of how she got the STI. And I struggled to convince her that, look, you need to take this matter up with the police. But she said, no, her husband said we should not talk about it. So you could tell that she was pained and she really wanted justice. But her husband has prevented her from getting justice, because the husband feels it would be a shame or to his own honor to hear that this kind of thing happened to his wife. So there's still a lot of advocacy that groups like he for she can do in this area. I don't know if you allow me to also talk about the issue of violence among pregnant women, because we are finding out that it's like the proportion of violence meted out to women when they are pregnant by their intimate partners is very high. We've seen that in studies in the Gambia here, we've seen that in studies in other places. And I believe that one of the reasons why this happens is because when a woman is pregnant, there's a lot of hormonal changes that happen in her that make her to sometimes behave in a way that may not be her normal way of behavior. And because men don't go through pregnancy, they don't understand these changes. So they interpret these changes in ways that, if you're not careful, can lead to a lot of friction, and this may manifest as violence. So men need to be encouraged to visit the clinics with their wives when they are pregnant. Men need to be encouraged to be more involved in the process of their wife's pregnancy. I mean, if they come to the clinic with a woman, if they read about pregnancy, if they know what is happening to her, then they have a better understanding of what she's going through, and they're able to provide the kind of supports that she needs even during the course of the pregnancy. In fact, research has suggested that men who attend the delivery process with their wives, that those delivery processes tend to be better. So most of our hospitals and most modern hospitals are now built in such a way that men can actually be in the labor room when their wives are in labor. Because we found out that when their husbands are there, they tend to have a better outcome for both the baby and the woman for the process of labor. So I think these are some of the roles that men can play in the process.
Men should be supportive partners in every aspect, from when they family, from the family level up to the higher level, be it medical, be it their victims, wherever they are. Men should be, they can start by being supportive. Thank you. Mudlamin, I want to also talk about the role of the youth, boys in this case. What can they start doing to ensure that they destroy this generation, the gender stereotypes? We understand parents have a role to play in the way they bring up their children, but when you're outside of the home, you're a young man growing up, you have seen how society is, how disempowering the women are. What are the things that they can employ from that early age on their own initiative to ensure that we break the generational, the gender stereotype?
I think think one of the things that we can do, society can, would ensure that, I mean, we break the stereotyping, like you said. One of which is we need to teach men how to cry. I think that's important. So they know that crying is very normal. So when you, of course, so when you see a woman crying, you wouldn't see them as being weak. You wouldn't see them as being, I mean, irritating. You would know it's very normal for them to cry. I think that's important. I mean, if you look at violence, like Doctor said, it cuts across a lot of things, a lot of places as well. I mean, you wouldn't think that someone as educated as a nurse or a doctor would go through violence on a daily basis. But even people in uniform, police officers, soldiers, I mean, I train them. You understand that even senior, either police or, I mean, soldiers, officers, I mean, sometimes they get beaten by their wives even. You get beaten by your wife, you cannot report because of, I mean, some of the things that are, I mean, that are going on in the camp. I mean, you're not supposed to cry as a man, you're supposed to do one or two things. But men also beat their wives a lot, even in the camps, during trainings. Because then you cannot go as a woman, as a senior officer, going to the charge office, for instance, to say I was beaten by my wife. So they just discuss it in the house and that's it. So I think it's important for people to understand that it is normal for you to cry. 1. 2, it's normal for a man to get into the kitchen, support women. So you know what they go through. Because also studies have shown that men that support, let's say, their mothers in the kitchen, their sisters in the kitchen, turn out to become better husbands and better fathers. But then you know what is happening in the kitchen. I think it's also important for men to understand that women, we are not in a competition. Women, for me, hold half the sky. And no society would prosper leaving half of the population behind. So if we understand that we are not in a competition with women and we are here to work as partners, I think some of these, if not all of these things, would come to a stop. I also think it's important for dialogue. It's very important. But a lot of times as men, we are taught to be stiff. You cannot manifest your emotions in your house. You're supposed to be seen as this tough person. You're supposed to be seen as this aggressive person. You see, wherever you see an aggressive husband in his matrimonial house, go outside. And wherever his peers are talking, he's always quiet. You understand? So your power should not be manifested on your wife at home. But also, parents need to understand that if you have a boy child and a girl child, if you take the boy child to school, you're supposed to take the girl child to school. So the boy also, when he grows up, would understand that it is important that I also take my girl child to school. I mean, we all know that in a lot of houses in the Gambia, especially where I'm from, Bakau, women are normally the breadwinners. They are more supportive of families. I think that is the truth. We don't know some of these things. So one of the things that we do at HIFOC, when we go to different communities, we encourage people to take their daughters, especially men, to school. Because some of these things that we are faced with on a daily basis, you see, the truth of the matter is, irrespective of the fact that we don't like saying it sometimes, men are the highest decision makers in this country. We know of women who are very empowered, who are educated, and understand the effects of FGM, for instance, but they would go home and subject their daughters to the practice because they want to belong. Because their husbands, mount pressure on them on a daily basis to ensure that they subject their daughters to the practice. But as a man, as the highest decision maker in your house, if you stand up to say, no, my daughter wouldn't be subjected to that harmful traditional practice, I don't think anybody in that family would have the guts to do that to your daughter. So that is why I think it's important for men to understand the effects of some of these things, to understand that we are not in a competition with women, because men in this country are scared of empowered women. That is the truth. Look at all the different institutions where you think you have women that are very empowered. Men hardly go there to get wives or to marry them, because men naturally are scared of empowered women. Because, they don't want to feel intimidated. They want to be household heads. And people know some of these people who are very empowered, who understand some of these things, actually become better wives for you. Because then they understand their roles and responsibilities as wives. So that is why I said men need to understand that they are not in a competition with women. It is important for, of course, maybe Dr. Patrick could come with an example of how he came into this country. He's the biggest HIFOC in this country for me, Dr. Patrick. You have your wife who's working, who's doing one or two things, has an appointment, you go with your wife. So men need to understand that we are not in a competition with women. Once we understand that, then I think this issue of gender-based violence would come to a stop.
Mr. Mane, in the context of the TRRC, since this work that we are doing, it's to intensify our support to victims you know, and in every aspect, it's not just the medical, it's not just prosecuting, but also the aftercare of victims and survivors, i.e. the psychosocial support that we offer them. What services do you have at the TRRC for SGBV victims? Because I know there's a TRRC mandate on how SGBV should be treated at the level of the transitional justice process. But also, what services do we have at the TRRC for those that are, say, SGBV victims? I know the psychosocial support is very big, and being a big victim-centered approach that we are taking at the TRRC. In the context of that, what do you think we can do more? And what are the, first of all, what are the things that are available for them? And what do you think needs to be added on to intensify this support?
Thank you. At the TRRC, we have different steps or mechanisms. So usually, it could be the victim support unit or the research and investigations unit as the first point of contact with victims of SGBV. So after our initial contact, then psychosocial support unit will be involved. But most importantly, we have a specific, task force that is dedicated to the issue of SGBV, because also you have issues of confidentiality. You want to ensure that the process is well protected, and also the confidence of victims is not lost in the process. So we have a dedicated team of investigators, statement takers, researchers, victim support officers, psychosocial support officers. All with a view to ensure that the trust is maintained throughout the process. So it can be psychosocial support unit can provide psychosocial support at any point, before, during, and after. And even after their interaction with us and they've gone back, some of them would be in touch with our psychosocial support unit or with the investigators. Even I would say a few days ago, I was in touch with one or two of our victims to reassure them, to be able to check on them, to see the progress, and they feel quite satisfied. And we would talk to them, how do you feel after narrating, your experience? They would tell us, well, I think it's just like it was amazing. I feel more, okay, because that itself is psychosocial support. So sometimes it can be specialized, but sometimes it may not be. So psychosocial support is provided before, during, and after. But what is more critical is TRRC is temporal. After TRRC, post-TRRC, now that would question the integrity of our institutions. At the police force, at the army, at the prisons, at the Ministry of Justice, what structures do we have to ensure that some of these things, continue? For example, I know TRRC will come up with reports and recommendations. Is to follow up on those recommendations and to ensure that some of these victims are looked after. And also civic society needs to take up the responsibility. We have one new establishment, I think, on psychosocial support established by Ngaima and others. I think that is very innovative and very welcoming to ensure that they follow up on post-TRRC. The Victim Center also have a role to play in this. For example, the police, I think we need to revisit the structures. For example, at the station, still the structures will be the same if nothing has changed. Because when you come to report a case of SGBV, there is no special treatment. So we need to train personnel that are competent and also specialized. For example, he was talking about if a man comes to report a case of SGBV, you will create drama in the station, but that should not create drama. Once you report it, at least you should have people who would respond to you quickly and address your issue. But these are challenges that we face. So the ministry, when it comes to investigations, when it comes to statement taking, there has to be a chain work from the house to the hospital to the police station to the Ministry of Justice, because the chain of evidence is also very material and important. The strength of the prosecution will depend on how successful the investigation is. And I think all this thing boils down to leadership at the police, at the, men should not use their their power to violate women. Neither should women do so. We're talking about men most of the time because this is what the evidence shows, but it has to take leadership from all of us. All this grammar we're talking about cannot be effectuated if we have not taken the necessary steps to ensure that these things are actually effectuated and practically achieved.
It's very evident that the fight on SGBV, it's interconnected, and it's not just one person's or one organization's job. It starts from the home, as you said, and it goes right up with no bounds. Because here we are trying to not only address SGBV, as we can see, it's not just about. It starts from gender inequality. That's the foundation. Gender inequality across all the spheres in the public discourse. So be it at the home, be it in the family, be it in the community, be it at the even representation. We consider the National Assembly. We have seen that women are not even adequately represented. That is also another issue. That and men, what you can do with regards to that is men can take the lead in fighting to ensure that there is gender inequality, because in as much as women at some point have to fight to get it, but also men can be their partners. Right, they can realize that, you know what, this is not right. You know, there needs to be some kind of equality, so that we can all move forward we can all develop as a nation. Because, as Mudlamin said, development, if it leaves half of the society behind, it's not inclusive development. Inclusive development obviously is not sustainable. So, Dr. Patrick, we have spoken a lot about the role men have to play in ensuring that they join the fight in SGBV, and also, but it's not also just to make sure that the fight in SGBV within the transitional justice process, this across board, what happens, as Abdul said, beyond the life of the TRRC, beyond the lives of the transitional justice process. Men still have a role to play, as we said, right from the home. But the support to victims when it comes to sexual and gender-based violence, how can men support victims? Because it's not just the medical support, it's not just giving them money to go to the hospital, but it's also the psychosocial support to make sure that their well-being is taken care of.
Yes. I think men need to be involved in the process from the beginning. Yeah. I'm so happy that on this panel, probably it's by design, we have men here sitting down and talking about the role of men. We cannot leave the issue of gender-based violence to just women to talk about only. We need to have male champions so that people begin to understand that it is not cool to perpetrate violence against women. If men begin to say so in men's organizations, in men's meetings, and gradually we're beginning to make it clear that it's no longer cool, it's no longer acceptable for a man to be involved in any form of violence against his wife or against any woman for that matter. And then we have to look at even our institutions, okay? We've mentioned the fact that especially when you go higher up in leadership and also in the different professions, you begin to find out that the number of women reduce. And there are several factors responsible for this. Part of the fact is that women tend to be, society has said women should be the primary homemakers. Women are usually the ones that are expected to raise children. And there are a lot of women that have so much to offer society, but they always they find themselves being forced to make the decision between raising their family or contributing actively to society. Society needs to make it easier for women to play both roles. I think as a country we are doing a little bit well in terms of the amount of time we give to women for maternity leave. But we need to go beyond that. We need to do much more than that. If you look at a lot of organizations, we don't create, especially organizations that have things like that are time bound. Like let's say in the schools, for example, the School of Nursing, the universities. Okay, if a woman decides to have a child while she's in school, almost certainly she's going to miss that school year. And that can be a factor for some people, because missing that school year for some people may even be the end of their schooling. Okay, so we need to find creative ways to make sure that women are well taken care of, women are well supported to be able to progress in their career. I know several women who have had to go on leave of absence after they've had children just because they couldn't find what to do with the children if they had to go back to work. But how many of our institutions, for example, have good daycare centers attached or creche where women can come and drop their children, continue their job and come back to breastfeed, go back to work and things like that. So we have to look at society as a whole and think of how we can overhaul the system such that we are actively encouraging women to participate in society building as well and encouraging them to grow in whatever professions or career they have chosen. I think these are some of the roles that men can play. I think one concrete thing that we can start with is beginning to encourage and model to our young boys, okay, the right way to treat girls. We just have to start from that point. It has to start from childhood so that the next generation can be spared some of these ugly things we see around us.
So catch them young to get it right. Exactly. Thank you. Mr. Mane, what would you say you would like to see men in the Gambia do more to support your work, but also after your work at the TRRC in supporting victims of Sgbv especially? What would you like to see men do more?
So first is to deconstruct our mindset when it comes to our biases regarding gender roles, to adopt a transformative approach, you know, which would see that you teach boys what you would teach women and teach women what you would teach men, such that we would achieve that objective. Secondly is we want to also see civic societies. Men, as we talk about our constitutions or talk about certain important issues, let us also adopt issues of, you know, women, especially Sgbv issues, and take it as, you know, at the forefront. Professional organizations like the Gambia Bar Association. Of course, we have the Female Lawyers Association, you know, attending to most of the Sgbv cases, but I think it is also important to have the Gambia Bar Association where we have a lot of men taking positive steps to take cases of Sgbv. I think at least from at the bar level, we would see that yes, men are doing something. And at the police, I think we need leadership to ensure that these structures are favorable, to ensure that cases are properly investigated up to the Ministry of Justice so that we can have successful prosecutions.
So a concerted effort. Mulamin, what would you like to say as your parting words to men, especially boys, the youth, in fighting Sgbv?
There's this hypocrisy or double standard I say in this country, excuse me, especially from men who would stand up and always advocate against GBV, talk about sexual violence and all the other forms. But when a woman comes out to talk about, let's say, an issue of rape, for instance, men would be the first to question. And for me, women do not owe anyone their truth, and their timeline also belongs to them. Of course, even at the TRRC, you would hear men say, why didn't you come out earlier to say you were sexual abuse, for instance? Why did you have to wait until 10 or 20 years to come out? We also need to understand how this society works. It's already very difficult, even, 99 years after you have been sexual abused, to come outside and talk about it. Talk less of talking about it a day or two after you have been sexually abused. And we also need to understand that most of these victims, if not, not all obviously, but most of them are minors, children, so it's difficult for them to come outside and open up and talk about some of these issues. And even with our security forces as well. Of course, I know that we have a lot of men in the security, in our security apparatus, and that they need to be able to trust victims of sexual abuse or violence. It's very traumatic. It's very disheartening. Hearing security officers trying to question the validity of a rape accusation, for instance. That is not your job. It's very bad to hear men trying to question some of the validity of, rape or sexual violence accusations. I think that is for the courts to decide. So, men, of course, have a huge role in that. We are supposed to trust women. We are supposed to ensure that, when women go to the different police stations to report, like he said, like Abdul said, they are given a space to talk about some of these issues, and that we have the concept of the one-stop center. Doctor knows about it. When you cannot go from the police station to a lawyer to a gynecologist at the same time. You cannot do that. It's very traumatizing. So it's important for different institutions in these big hospitals where we have some of these cases, for us to have, let's say, a lawyer, a doctor, a police officer in one room where victims would have to, just narrate their stories once. Otherwise, it's difficult to narrate your story once, twice, thrice, 4 times. I mean, it's very difficult to actually live with that toughness of having to repeat yourself over and over and over again.
So we need to strategize on our one-stop centers.
Our one-stop centers.
Make it victim-friendly.
Victim-friendly, overhaul our systems to ensure that victims are free to come out and talk about some of these issues.
Thank you so much, and we would like to once again thank the Irish Aid, Government of Ireland, for the help to SGBV victims especially, and also accompanying the transitional justice process to fight SGBV and address the issues. Thank you so much.
I say no